Guys, Insight from Ukraine and Russia is back with more, probably some of the wildest translated intercepts that I have heard in maybe this entire conflict. And it looks like a former U.S. ally might just be on the battlefield supporting Russia. We are going to break it all down. As always, guys, be sure to check out his channel. I always link to it. He is really doing good work out here, getting English translations of at least some intercepts from Ukrainian intelligence, translating them to English for us. And he is subject to the same questionable YouTube monetization nonsense that I am. And you should absolutely give his videos a like and also subscribe, become a channel member. That way you can support him directly instead of depending on ad revenue, which, you know, YouTube will sometimes just pull from videos for some pretty specious reasons. And if you want to support my channel, of course, I do a weekly breakdown on the Patreon of all the combat videos that YouTube won't let me show you. You know the sort of viral videos I'm talking about. Link to that's in the description as well. Okay, let's get into what we're all here for, which is these crazy intercepts.
Interception you'll hear right now was caught on February 10th. It's important material because you'll hear two drone operators who navigated the recent attack on Ukrainian infrastructure. Both of them are Kurds speaking Kurdish language. The Ukrainian intelligence has translated it into Ukrainian and I've translated it into English. So let's listen to it.
I mean, you can just listen into the language and you hear it's something in the Arabic or Persian family.
The next.
Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about who are the Kurds and why is this so significant? Well, you guys may know the Kurds are an ethnic group that span a number of countries. They are located in, well, you can see a ton here. They are heavily located in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, particularly northern Iraq, and Syria, right? The next largest population of Kurds is actually in Germany. Now, let's see if we can find a map of Greater Kurdistan. Here's Kurdish inhabited areas of the Middle East. And this is really significant because you can see the Kurdish problem. Or the problem that the Kurds are subject to. Within Iraq, they are seen as an ethnic minority, and under Saddam's rule were sometimes the victim of brutal reprisals. At one point, the Kurds actually revolted during the Gulf War on the belief that the U.S. would back them up because the U.S. was, of course, destroying the Iraqi military. But this backfired. The U.S. did not invade Iraq. The Kurds were left on their own and were absolutely brutally killed by Saddam Hussein and his regime. After the U.S. invaded Iraq and booted Saddam, the Kurds actually became one of the best U.S. allies. Sort of like how when you have, well, in the case of Ukraine, right? The U.S. provided aid to Ukraine in the form of weapons and training, honestly, for several years leading up to this conflict. We also provided a lot more aid to the Afghan military, but because the Afghans never really cared about the U.S. or about building the state, they never really embraced or accepted the U.S. help. It was mostly just they would accept the help that would allow them to enrich themselves. Kurdistan, on the other hand, is a little different. T-Mobile, Reddit, and even Chick-fil-A have reported breaches exposing tens of millions of customers' personal data. Your online privacy and safety have never been more important. That's why I wanted to talk about today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Grab the big deal now because Atlas VPN is just $1.83 a month with 3 months free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect your privacy and get the many benefits of Atlas VPN for this ridiculously low price. You can get this deal by clicking the link in the description below, but be quick because it is a limited time offer. One Atlas VPN subscription protects unlimited devices. So from your laptop to your phone, Atlas VPN has you covered. Atlas VPN also blocks malicious links, ads, trackers, and notifies you when someone is trying to steal your data. Atlas VPN keeps Google searches private and prevents online companies from tracking your activity. You'll be able to see price deals only available in select locations, like deals on airlines and hotels, and you can access geo-restricted content on services like Netflix and Hulu. Get the big deal now because Atlas VPN is just $1.83 a month with 3 free months and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect your privacy and get the many benefits of Atlas VPN for this ridiculously low price. You can get this deal by clicking the link in the description below, but hurry because this is a limited time offer. In Iraq, Iraqi Kurds really believe in the Kurdish identity. They believe in the Kurdish state. They believe in self-government. And it's a really, really powerful drive for Kurds to achieve their sovereignty in northern Iraq. As a result, they really embraced U.S. help. Kurdish forces, including Kurdish special forces, are some of the best U.S.-backed allies in the entire Iraq war. Let's see if we can find some Kurdish special forces in Iraq. These guys were some of the best U.S. allies. And the Kurdish troops are just notorious for their fighting abilities. I mean, you can see these guys here, and you can just tell these guys were real partners. They were not the sort of one foot out the door partners that it often felt. Many U.S. soldiers reported that the Iraqis or even many of the Afghans sort of felt like. I mean, that was sort of my impression. You had, other than one really good Afghan army unit that I worked with, it felt like absolutely pulling teeth to try to get the Kurds, to get the Afghans to actually take anything resembling a risk, like, say, leaving their bases to patrol at all. And the Kurds, from everyone who's worked with them, including my brother actually, has said that is not the case. The Kurds are here to do serious work. There's a problem, though. You see, the Kurds, despite something like 15 years of being staunch U.S. allies, and they explicitly said their geopolitical goal is to be like as strong of an ally as Israel is to the United States. That was their whole goal. And they, despite a long and robust service to the U.S., after the U.S. withdrew from Iraq, you saw the rise of ISIS and the Syrian civil war. This is where things get kind of weird. And the Kurds were some of the biggest victims of ISIS, right? ISIS was primarily a Sunni Muslim organization. But the Kurds, as someone who was not Iraqi and in some ways much more secular than ISIS's draconian interpretation, the Kurds fought ISIS even without U.S. support for a long time. And with U.S. support, the Kurds were some of the most effective on-the-ground forces pushing back the Islamic State, not just in Syria, not just in Iraq, but in Syria as well. Kurdish forces really, it's hard to understate how motivated, how properly trained these guys were. Again, not all of them were super highly trained, but they really, compared to the Iraqi army, they really acquitted themselves extremely well. And after ISIS was defeated, the Turks decided that they needed to take on this pesky Kurdish problems. Turks for a long time have seen the Kurds as being sort of a separatist breakaway province, almost like a separatist region that must be brought to heel. The Turkish and Kurds have been in some form of low intensity conflict for a long time. And the U.S. actually abandoned the Kurds in, I think, 2018, just up and left them high and dry without a major security partner in the region. Remember, the Kurds fighting tooth and nail against not just the remnant of ISIS, but the Turkish military, and a number of other bad actors in Syria. And so without U.S. support, of course, the Kurds turned to the Russians, who were happy to partner with a ready U.S., former U.S. ally who is already equipped, trained, and, battlefield effective. And you can see in some of these videos here, you've got Russian recruits Syrian Kurds to replace some of the U.S.-led forces. You can see Russian military police units partnering with Iraqi Kurds to conduct joint patrols and security operations in Syria and Iraq, as well as distributing aid. They are really, really working hard. Russia spent a lot of time and energy swooping in and establishing a strong relationship with the Kurds in hopes of getting them to be a more supportive ally and to back them against Turkey. All this to say, you have to understand all this context in order to see why it's huge that now Kurdish soldiers are working against Ukrainian forces operating drones.
Interception is
So it's telling because these are good quality soldiers that are here doing this. And it's not clear necessarily that the Kurds are on the front lines. Every country has its own agreements, but these Kurds are generally should be considered not top tier fighters, but pretty good fighters, fairly skilled, have definitely in many cases gone toe to toe with NATO forces in the form of Turkey. So it's a testament to the depth of favors that Russia is calling in for this sort of thing, and a testament to U.S. bungling in the region that one of our staunchest Middle Eastern allies is now fighting against us or fighting against one of our allies in Russia. This is probably one of the. It's just hard to hear. It's hard to hear because the Kurds have been nothing but loyal friends to the United States, and we betrayed them in their time of need. And now, of course, we are paying the price as they are working against our ally Ukraine and with our enemy Russia.
The phone call between a Russian soldier and his wife. The interception was made at the end of January, and it's a pretty desperate call. So let's listen to it.
Ну, говори.
Ну что, в общем, не скоро мы увидимся.
Почему?
Здесь все плохо. Здесь заставляю подписывать контракт. Кто-то подписывает, кто-то нет. И, в общем, по мобилизованным сказали не через полгода, то, может быть, через год отпустят в отпуск, может быть, кого-нибудь.
This is, of course, we've talked about this ad nauseum. Russia loves these contracts, and it implies, of course, that it is a fair agreement between the state and the soldier, but nothing could be further from the truth. Without an independent judiciary, anyone who can actually enforce the terms of the contract, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. It's sort of like when, if you make a contract with your, if your 6-year-old makes a contract with your 4-year-old that they're going to share the Nintendo controller, right? Ultimately, unless the parents intervene to make sure the contract terms are enforced, there's no enforcement at work. The bigger, stronger kid is just going to do whatever he wants, and the smaller kid is just going to have to take it, regardless of what the contract says. This is the power dynamic between individual soldiers and the Russian state because of the lack of independent judiciary. Now, again, Ukrainian soldiers, it's worth noting, also sign up oftentimes, in most cases, for the duration of the war. But the difference is that they're at least honest about it. They are at least straightforward with you are being mobilized in your country's great time of immense need. And so we are doing this. You're doing this. You are now a soldier. Welcome to the reality that, many generations of men all throughout history, all throughout the world have been subject to. So just the fact that Russia adds this legalistic or legal appearing decoration to this reality is just a recipe for heartbreak and disaster.
А так, короче, до конца военной операции.
Ну, отпуск должен быть год.
Нет, по мобилизованным нет. Контрактников даже контрактников не хотят отпускать. Видишь, что Вова сказал? Вова сказал, то, что хочет набрать большое количество, то есть увеличить армию численности. И вот сейчас вот это дело уже началось.
Okay, this is something that I think is really, really interesting. This is, of course, about Putin's goal to increase the size and capability of the military. This is something that his defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, announced a reorganization, standing up of new battalions, brigades, and commands. And it reflects a really dangerous trend in the Russian military, but the U.S. is also certainly prone to it as well. And that is the tendency of the people in the top levels of leadership to be receiving information that is not adequate to make decisions. And what I mean by this is there's clearly a culture gap between what is reported by the time it gets to the Kremlin and the reality on the ground. Someone needs to sit there and say to Putin, listen, if you want to increase the size of the army, there are real constraints to doing so. You need trained soldiers. You need trainers to train up the soldiers. You need equipment to give them. You need soldiers, but you also need soldiers that are somewhat willing, somewhat motivated, right? I mean, otherwise you're going to have a force of just frighteningly low levels of discipline. And if soldiers believe that they will not be receiving adequate training, adequate supplies, adequate weapons, adequate leadership, and that they aren't going to get their contracts honored, you're creating an environment where soldiers are going to do things. They're not going to fight hard for their unit. They are going to operate in self-interest. And we've seen videos of this. Leaked video from Volodar that we looked at on the Patreon. They showed the Russian soldiers fleeing in panic in response to a fairly routine combat situation. An allied vehicle near patrol has become disabled. And instead of performing some relatively simple tasks like getting the wounded onto a safe vehicle, moving the weapons and sensitive equipment out of the damaged tank, large numbers of the unit simply begin to sprint away. They believe they are in imminent danger of taking artillery fire or something, but there's just no loyalty. And why should there be, right? Why are you going to fight hard for a country that cannot fight for you? Now, the reason this gap in knowledge and reality, right? The reality of the military on the ground and the Kremlin's perception of what their military is capable of, The U.S. is prone to that too. It's almost famous of the fact that every year for about 20 years, the U.S. was told the Afghan army was growing rapidly, becoming much more professional, taking the fight to the Taliban, and that they would be 18 to 24 months away from being fully independent. For 20 years, the Afghan army was 18 to 24 months away from full operational capability. And the fact is that almost certainly someone lied or exaggerated to the Pentagon for decades. And it probably, I suspect, is every layer wanted to have something nice to say, right? It's like, let's say you're a commander, and it's easy to tell if your commander is good or not. Good commanders take territory. They take the fight to the enemy. They achieve battlefield success. And bad commanders lose territory, all other things being equal. So sometimes, sometimes your mission is to trade space for time or conduct a defense in depth, and different standards. But basically, you have clear battlefield objectives. Good commanders achieve those objectives, and poor commanders fail at those. In a counterinsurgency, it's a little weirder. So you have to sort of find different metrics for what constitute success and what constitutes good command. And what that means is that you get to lie a little bit, right? If your commander, for example, says, I want you to take this village, you cannot lie and be like, I'm actually in the village right now, sir. I'm a great commander. My unit is in the town square of village X, right? You're going to know. But if your commander says, I want you to make the Afghan army more professional, you could lie about that pretty easily. You just go, well, when I got here, they didn't wear their uniforms all the time, but now they wear their uniforms some of the time. So I give myself a 10 out of 10 on increasing professionalism. You have that happen, that sort of weird, squishy, subjective interpretation of non-data. You layer it 16, 18 times in the Pentagon bureaucracy. And by the time it gets to the generals, they too believe these delusional things about the status of the war they're fighting. They're almost as blind and ignorant as, well, the Russians.
Увеличивание армии. Не знаю, вот сегодня у нас парни приехали. Они вот как раз задали вопрос. Никто не желает контракт подписать. Я не знаю, у меня башка трещит вообще, просто ужас. От таких новостей просто башка разболелась, кошмар. Да, короче, уже больше рассчитывать нечего. Хочешь, правду тебе скажу? Прям. В общем, один исход. Как один? Два. Есть два путя. Один путь — это в гробу, и второй — это в конце вот этой всей войны, когда она закончится. Может быть, приду. Когда все это дело закончится, не знаю. Вон сейчас парнишки говорят то, что в феврале месяце.
Okay, this is interesting, right? This sense of hopelessness. And this is one of the things that the U.S. identified as a pretty serious problem in the Second World War, was that there was no tour of duty policies, right? Many soldiers simply remained on the front lines until the war was over, or until they were wounded or killed. And that did create a sense among many soldiers of low morale, of despondency. Now, there were some exceptions, right? The classic being the World War II bomber crews, who had to fly 24 missions for a tour of duty. Unfortunately, statistically, 24 missions was a borderline non-accomplishable mission, so much so that when it did happen, it was like a cause for celebration, which is kind of horrific when you think about it. Like being a bomber crew lead is a 100% fatality rate outcome, which is, absolutely horrifying to think about. And that is just crushing to soldiers' morale, right? Because you want to survive. And so the U.S. and even the Afghans in the Soviets in the Soviet-Afghan War instituted troop rotations. Conscripts would spend 1 year in training, generally 1 year to 18 months in country in Afghanistan, and then they would rotate out. They would have completed their military service. And that allowed them to continue to have something to look forward to, have a specific task to stay focused, to keep morale up. There are some, the counterpoint is that oftentimes soldiers like the US soldiers in Vietnam, who also had a rotation system, would sometimes, those soldiers often would focus more on surviving and less on achieving the mission. But again, that's what non-commissioned officers and officers are for. Something else Russia doesn't have.
Будет, говорят, решающий будет месяц. Потому что войска стянули. Наши войска стянули, новую технику везде подогнали.
This is one of the things that we've talked about on the daily update for some time, that February is a really important month, right? Russia seems to want to take the fight to Ukrainians before they get major Western aid like Bradleys and Leopard tanks. It says our army has, of course, concentrated their forces and gathered equipment, and the Ukrainians have pulled the troops and vehicles. I think he's referring to the fact that they've pulled many troops off of the front lines in places like Bakhmut, and they've accepted a certain level of defense in depth or trading space for time in exchange for having a large reserve element to blunt any major Russian offensive. And as we've talked about, it seems like Ukraine has correctly marshaled its forces. Unless Russia can step up its forces, step up its offensive efforts into another gear, which, again, not certainly possible in the Russian way of war, but not something you would see in a NATO combat situation. It seems like maybe it's coming out in favor of Ukrainians.
Везде технику. И то есть будет уже, пожалуй, наверное, решающий месяц. Либо всех мы победим, либо мы и будет продолжение войны.
And the third option is victory of Ukraine, and I really hope it will happen very soon. Anyway, thank you so much for your attention and support. Thanks to those of you who became a member of my channel. Thank you for likes and comments. I'll see you next time.
Yep. I always link to it in the description. And of course, guys, thank you guys for watching, and thanks tremendously to my patrons at Patreon. If you want to become a member, the link is in the description. Thanks to my Colonel and Lieutenant tier patrons, Colonel tier Thomas McLeod, and the rest of the Lieutenant tier. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.